Well, good morning.
Good morning. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Church Chat. We missed last week.
I know.
We just had a week. Got busy.
Sometimes you miss church chat.
Sometimes you miss it.
One of the rules of church chat.
That's right. But we're back.
Yeah.
This week and today, we thought we'd talk a little bit about our sermon series that we're in here at Maitland Presbyterian Church.
Green Faith.
And then a little bit about an upcoming Bible study we have and why we're doing it. So those are our two topics.
Yeah. So we've been just finished the fourth week of Green Faith, and we're talking about the environment. And you know, it's not great. You know, there's
just in general.
Yeah, I mean, it's beautiful, but it's also, you know, constantly in trouble. And it's something that we've never really talked about in church sustained amount of time before.
Yeah, which could be the title of the book of the past 8 years. Like things that we've never talked about in church before, but now we feel like compelled to do so.
Yeah.
But this one especially, I think the social issues, there's like an expectation that it's addressed from the pulpit on some level. Like when an issue rises up in the media in a social justice capacity, like of course we'll address those things in church. But I feel like the environment is when it's easier to like put on the back burner indefinitely, not because we're not in big trouble, but there seems to be less of an expectation from like people in the community that someone's preaching on it.
Yeah.
Like it seems to be more separate from being a faith issue, which is strange because it's actually very much a faith issue.
Well, and everything, what's the thing, you know, the urgent beats the important.
Yeah.
You know, and other things have always felt more urgent, but this is, you know, this could really impact everybody if the climate, you know, man-made climate change is allowed to continue, and I think I think people don't want to think about it, especially Christians sometimes, because they kind of feel like, well, it's the earth, like God will take care of it.
Yeah.
And so it becomes kind of a, I don't know, maybe people feel like they're being unfaithful even by talking about it. I don't know.
I think too. For those that are like in the kind of camp, because aren't we all in a camp at this point? For those of us in the camp that believe in climate change and are feeling just sort of overwhelmed by the climate data coming out, it's easy to be like, well, what can one person do? And so we just set it aside because it feels like, is my like one tiny bucket of recycling really going to turn this around? Well, no, it's not. And so it becomes so overwhelming. It's easy just to set it aside entirely. And anytime we bring something up in church, we're clear that we're not climate scientists. We're not pretending to like have all of the answers of how we fix the earth and take care of the earth. But it's important to understand like the biblical foundations of why this is absolutely a faith issue. And so Christians, in response to God's teaching, should be responding, at least in some capacity.
Absolutely.
Or as a starting point, at least talking about it, even if we're all uncomfortable because it's so overwhelming.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
Yeah.
So we started out with talking about...
Well, we kind of started out with that like... first of all, it is a spiritual issue because of what we see about creation in the scriptures that, that God cares about not just us, but the whole creation. And that we believe, especially in our particular branch of Christianity, that at the end of sort of time, as it were, that God will redeem everything, not just like we float up as these sort of spiritual ghosts
right
up to this
all this stuff really matters. This is eternity.
That God's going to redeem the whole earth, which means people and creation, dirt and plants and all of that will
God
be
will do
restored
it
to
through
good.
us.
Yeah,
maybe.
That we're a part of that work.
Yeah.
That we're in this between when Jesus was here and when God will do that final thing. And our job is to be like working towards that final thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And the trees that we plant, they might still be there.
Right. And so that's why it's a spiritual issue. And we also talk some about hope, that we're wired for hope as Christians.
Yeah.
And if we're throwing our hands up and saying what could possibly be done, then that's a real problem. That's not what we're taught to be.
Yeah, if we lose hope, that's probably the worst thing that could happen.
Right. And then you talked about sin.
Yeah, so sin is,
when I was designing the sermon series, I was like, I'll do hope because that's kind of my MO. And then Dave will really lay into him on sin because that's kind of his MO.
Dave will do sin and science.
Yeah. And I'm doing like hope and the church and social justice. Anyway, so talk about what you did with sin.
And so, but the reason the climate is screwed up is because of sin, is because of greed and evil regimes and the exploitation of people. The big example I used was why, because you started out about planting trees in Haiti, and I kind of went to like, where'd all their trees go? And I didn't know their horrible history, that they were the first free democratic black country in the Western Hemisphere because of they revolted and killed their masters, which is something I always get excited about. But then they ended up paying what's
France?
the word? Paying France
Reparations.
Yeah. They paid reparations to their former slave masters.
Like unreal.
For 122 years. There were still people in France getting reparations in the 20th century.
That's unbelievable.
And now they deny it. I guess it's done by a king, and now they're a democracy. It's still the same country, though.
Do you want to connect that to trees? Because I heard it, but
so one of the things that they this horrible debt that they had to pay was that they had to use their trees, and their they had mahogany trees, which were really valuable for boat building. And so, when it's like going to the payday loan place, you gotta hawk everything to be able to pay off this horrible debt. And there's just little stories like that all around the world, and you have the corporations that want to use cheap chemicals that if they can prove that it doesn't kill you immediately, then there must not be a long-term problem. So just sin's just
sort of the proliferation of sin throughout time and throughout groups of people, and that we think about climate sin as like, people who throw trash on the ground, but it's actually like much more systemic.
Yes.
And the trees in Haiti are having to be redeveloped because of this long history of exploitative slavery and sin and brokenness over a people, but you don't always connect those things in your head.
Yeah, and that it's a good example of how the little sins that we so often with sin, we get so focused on things we feel really guilty about.
Right.
Or there are things that will destroy your life or tear up your families, but there's also the sins that you don't feel guilty about cause just as much damage, especially when we're all doing it at the same time.
Well, maybe that's why we don't feel as guilty about it. Like, you look around and everyone else is doing what we're doing, so how bad can it really be? And that we sort of collectively get in trouble. Yeah,
and so the things we feel bad about are more because they're taboo, because other people will shame us. But the collective weight of all of our sin against the environment just really has done some real damage.
Right. And I think too, we feel guilty about things that historically our churches that maybe you grew up in the church, what did the church tell you should not do? And if you're doing those things, then that's probably the worst thing you could be doing in your head.
Yeah.
And so what we didn't hear about in the church growing up was protecting the environment.
Right.
That was something that was talked about in the political sphere and maybe in community discussions, but it was not something I've really heard talked about much in the church.
Yeah.
And so we don't connect it with sin because we've never connected it with the church.
Yeah. We definitely heard a lot about, how far is too far, though, growing up.
As two kids who grew up in the purity movement of the 90s, that was something the church talked about every week. Every week in youth groups, heard several sermon series from the pulpit. So sexual sin is something I think a lot of people, when you think about sin, you think about things that might fall, that we were told at least fell into that category, whether they do or not. It's a whole nother podcast. But so there's more inherent shame because whatever you were told as a child was wrong, as things as an adult, I think you'll have more shame about.
Yeah, but ultimately, we find out what is sin from reading the Bible and from seeing that. That's where we see it, and it's all over the place. And the things that we feel bad about aren't necessarily the things the Bible condemns. And the Bible really condemns violence, and over and over, it's just
injustice.
Every page, it's not every page, but violence and injustice. And so then, so that was the sin week. Yeah.
And then Dave ended by being so she'll fill in that hole next week, which I feel like now you've done 2 or 3 times. You're I'm going to dig a really big hole and Megan will figure it out next week. So I was not able to totally fill in the hole of sin. But we did talk about what repentance means, and that repentance not only means to stop doing the bad thing, but then to do the good thing. The word in the Greek literally talks about a change of mind. And so to do the good thing. And so we looked a lot at, okay, we know what the bad stuff is. What does it mean to do the good thing? And Jesus tells us over and over again, 2 things. What do? We love God and we love our neighbor. But the loving neighbor idea actually came out of Leviticus. Jesus didn't make that up. And what we see when we read the broader scope of what love the neighbor means in Leviticus, it has this social justice piece of looking out for people who need you.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, in the New Testament, Jesus, when someone's like, who is my neighbor, tells the story of the Good Samaritan, again,
Yeah.
helping someone who needs you. So what's the good thing when it comes to the climate? And we ask then, okay, well, who needs me and who can I help? And at a social justice level, that's the people who are struggling the most, are at risk of being hurt the soonest because of climate change. And then in our own country, especially too, are people who are being hurt the most by pollution.
Mm-hmm.
That just based on how much money you make is almost entirely correlated with how far away the closest like pollutant factory is, or hazardous waste center. And so you're seeing like actual harm to people and their health, and especially children's health, that's directly correlated with race and financial finances.
Mm-hmm.
So then we say, okay, well, God says, love my neighbor, and especially my neighbor in need. So how do you help someone? How do we advocate against pollutants in general, and then specifically putting them in the backyard of someone who just doesn't have the ear of someone in legislation the way that you might with your financial resources?
Yeah.
So that's what we looked at.
Yeah.
And then this past week you did
Talked about science.
science. Yes.
So,
science. This is like our very quick overview of what we've been doing for like a month here at church.
So it was just yesterday? That was just yesterday.
That was yesterday.
Wow. It goes fast. So talk about how Christians can and should be actual scientists.
Mm-hmm.
And that because of the incarnation, because Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, like took on flesh and kept it and still has it, we believe, then we don't have any excuse for spiritualizing everything. That the material world is the world, and matter matters, and so the study of matter and the universe is a holy pursuit, and so there's really no. So I talked a little bit about some of the pseudoscience and conspiracy theories like creation science, and I'm not able to say anything nice about them, but BioLogos is really good at speaking to that in a really loving but also very faithful to science and the Bible way.
And their website's biologos.com, right?
Biologos.org.
.org. Okay, biologos.org. So if you're looking for a bunch of resources about from people who really love Jesus and really love science and have brought those two things together around questions or ideas, go to BioLogos and check out their stuff. It's great, just across the board. But
I did want to, So and then I did say something at the 9:30 service. I altered a little bit for 11. That's one to unpack a little bit.
Yeah.
So trying to remember the exact phrase, but I was talking about the real urgency of about the damage to the earth.
Right.
And the biggest problems facing us as people are violence, climate change, injustice, the divide between the rich and poor. And I said that the biggest problems facing us as people will not be solved by prayer, but by science. And that I think that hit people a little. And that's probably the idea behind it was to sometimes you have to say, I feel the need to say things to elicit a response. And I really do believe that, but I just wanted to unpack a little bit if anyone heard that and was like, I didn't like that.
Well, I heard it and was like, okay, like that's a really provocative statement. I'm sure he's going to like super unpack what he means by that. And then you just moved on.
And I realized.
Just blew past it. So between services, you're like, how was it? And I was like, well, you made that one statement and then you just kind of left it there and moved on, which I feel like could shake like a lot of people's foundations. And I kind of know what you mean because I know you, but if someone's just hearing it and then you said.
And I realized that I had a paragraph after it in one of my versions of the sermon that I don't know what happened to it.
So what, do you want to share a little bit more about
what I added into it for the second service was that that prayer. What did I have a new idea for a sermon too. That there's that thing that says prayer changes things. Mm-hmm. That I would edit that to say prayer changes people who change things.
Okay.
And so our biggest, a scientist doing an experiment doesn't pray for a failed experiment to become true. They pray for the energy to go on and keep trying things and to do the work to find something that'll work. And I mean, the simple truth is that, especially when it comes to climate change, we know what it takes. We know what the answer is. We just haven't found the wherewithal to make our leaders do it. And so you can find that in prayer, but prayer is the medium, like is the motivation to go and do that real work of making these changes happen. And so, but the changes will happen because of the science, not because of miraculous intervention.
Well, and I liked one thing you clarified at 11 was that sometimes, you're going to pray for a miracle in your life or, in the life of someone you love. And like every so often, very rarely, but every so often that happens. And so I think one thing you clarified was it's not to say that prayer doesn't matter or that sometimes God doesn't just do something huge that only God could do, but that prayer can easily become this crutch for us to just not do anything. Like the real cliche thing about like the guy's drowning in the ocean and he prays for God to save him. And then he sees a helicopter and it goes by. He's like, no, God's going to save me. A boat comes by. No, God's going to save me. That prayer can easily become an excuse for us to not be a part of the work that God's doing.
Yeah.
Because we just want to wait and have God just fix it, just magic it. But what if God is speaking to you in prayer about how you might be a part of that work that God's doing? So it doesn't mean prayer doesn't matter, but it means we can easily use prayer as an excuse, is what I heard in that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. And I think especially with issues that are so pressing, and like if you really think about it, it'll freak you out. And so you go to God, you go in prayer, but sometimes you feel like you did something,
right.
And if that's all you ever do is pray about climate change or pray about gun violence or pray about all these things that we all know what the answers are, just there's something blocking us from making them happen, like you're kind of a part of the problem. Mm-hmm. And so we have to just be really, I think we have to teach and preach that we're the ones that are going to fix this problem, and we're going to do it in partnership with people who don't pray or who pray a different way So I think that's, do you feel like I clarified that enough?
Yeah, I think so.
What are you thinking?
So. Yeah, that I think it's a both and that I think it's that. Yes, I agree with almost all of what you're saying, that I think people still might have the question of like, well, does he not believe in prayer? And I don't think that you don't believe in prayer. I think in this particular issue, especially, and a lot of the social issues we face, like prayer is a part of what transforms us to be people who can go and do and might, like, you can pray for really specific things, like God, bring the right people in front of me to partner with in this, or God, give me the courage to not be paralyzed by the scope of this issue, or give me the strength to keep going. And I think those are all like the kind of prayers that God really answers in this.
Yes. No, I totally agree with that.
Okay. So to say like, we know the answer, so we should just go do it. I think prayer is a part of that though.
Yeah. But but it's not the. Yeah, no, I agree with that.
Oh, you don't have to agree. I'm saying that's what I believe.
Yeah.
And so if you love prayer like I do, you should come hang out with Pastor Megan, who loves and believes in the power of prayer. I'm joking.
Yeah, I know. That's a good one.
So yeah, I think, and there's definitely a whole, like, what is prayer and how does it work and what does it do, is there's like a lot of really smart people that have written a lot of things on all kinds of different places about that. And all of us have had the experience of like praying for something and not getting what we prayed for or what we thought God would do. So clearly there's like a lot to unpack about prayer that we should do on another podcast.
Yeah. But pray while you work.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like whistle while you work, but pray while you work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I like that.
And then this Sunday, you're going to wrap it all up and you're going to fix it. You're going to fix the whole thing.
Now, this Sunday, we'll talk a little bit more about the church, like how we as a church are called into this work of helping try and sort of save the creation, and why the church specifically is the group that's supposed to do that. Like why the church and why not just wait for another group to take this on. So kind of revisiting a little why we're talking about this in church at all and where we've been with it. But also there are some unique characteristics of who churches are and who God's made us to be as the church and what we believe the church is that sort of compels us into things like talking about the climate and being a part of the solution, whether we want to or not. That's what the church is.
That sounds awesome.
So that's what we'll be doing.
I can't wait to
this
hear
week.
it.
I think I
feel
haven't
like
written
I
it
just
yet.
did.
It's Monday, so that's all I have at this point. But hopefully by Sunday there'll be around 2,500 words to that effect. That's the plan. So that's what we've been doing. The other thing we've been working on, and we won't take too long to talk about it today,
No, we got
but like it'll take what it takes. You don't have to disagree with me. He's been in a real disagreeing kind of place this past week, like a little interrupty, a little pushy. We'll see how this goes this week.
I'm trying so hard not to interrupt you.
It's hard when you believe that you're so brilliant that only you have things to say. We're going to be doing a Bible study. Why don't you talk about that?
Yes, so excited. When is it?
Next Thursday.
Next Thursday.
The 25th.
Right, the 25th, May 25th. And so it is a Bible study about how faithful Christians can be a part of the LGBTQ community and can be allies for people in the LGBTQ community.
Right.
And that as Christians, we should be. And, you know, there are lots and lots of gay Christians and lots of people who are very open and affirming and all that, but also maybe don't know why. They know they are, but they maybe don't know why. And I think a lot of times we look at, you know, what the different scriptures say that you know, have been kind of used as clobber scriptures against people who are LGBTQ. And people don't know what to do with them. So, you know, we know that the people who are hateful have a very strong, you know, emphasis on those scriptures, but we don't know what we're supposed to do with them. So that about sum up what we're going to do?
Yeah, that you know, anytime you come into a conversation and you're not a part of a community, like we wade into this conversation as people who can't speak with firsthand knowledge and information. And so this is the beginning of several conversations, and we'll definitely try and add to those like voices, people, because we have lots of folks in our church that are part of the community who have offered to share and speak. So this first step is our way of saying like, okay, but as pastors, here's how we've read those scriptures that we know people bring up. What about this one? What about that one? Here's how we don't just throw those scriptures out and say we're just going to ignore them because we don't like what they say.
Right.
But in fact, if you read them, what we would say correctly, like if you dig into the Greek and the Hebrew, the biblical context of when it was written, the intentions of the author, that you can actually take the whole of scripture seriously, start to finish, and also be a fully affirming ally or member of the community.
Yeah.
So that's where we're going with this, is to kind of say, okay, as pastors, this is where our heart is on this. And you know, it's hard. It's not, again, not something we've talked as much about probably as we should have. But with the things that are happening in our community, and especially in the state of Florida where we are, there's just a lot of what we would call misinformation about what Christians do or don't believe about this. And you kind of, for such a time as this, like for us to be quiet at this point, we feel would be wrong. And it's probably been wrong. We've been quiet as long as we have, but as pastors, we haven't really shared our heart with our congregation here as much about how we've done the work with those scriptures and the conclusions we've come to. So our hope is to give people who, like you said, who are saying like, either I'm a member of that community or I am an ally of that community, but do I have to like set aside the Bible to do that? And the emphatic answer we'd have is no.
Right.
That absolutely you can hold the scripture in very high regard and also be in the community or an ally of the community, and that's what we believe is the right way to approach it. So we're hoping to, like, lots of people might benefit from this. We hope a lot of people come. If you're someone that, again, is just wants that sort of confirmation that what God's put on your heart at a gut level bears out in biblical scholarship, like this is for you. If you're someone that's really still wrestling with it and isn't sure what to do with it, but would like to hear a different perspective than the sort of the one that is often parroted on Facebook.
Right.
This is for you. And so we'd love just to have anybody come and listen, and then we'll have some time in conversation at the end of it as well. Again, not the last time that we'll address this, but
yeah, this is our first step, and then we're going to reassess and see where we need to go from here.
Yes.
But I do. I mean, I know there's not a huge amount of people that listen to our podcast, but you know, this isn't a place where we're going to debate people's
Right.
worth. You know, that
Correct.
people are not up for debate, and
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
not even going to be like doing, oh, you can see this either way. Uh, there are churches that could do that. That's not what this is going to be. And so, you know, you can absolutely bring your questions and bring
Yeah.
your struggles, and especially if you grew up in a church where, you know, gay people were the thing that the pastor beat up on. You probably have some trauma from that, and so we'd love to talk about that. But you know, this is not going to be oh, you know, we're coming to it neutral, and you can come with what you believe and
Right.
leave with the same thing.
Yeah, which we're aware is not like a universally popular opinion, you know, in the community certainly, and even within our own congregation.
Yeah.
But as pastors, our job is to say, here's what we believe to be a faithful interpretation of the Bible. That's like at a foundation what our job is. This
Mm-hmm.
isn't us like doing something political because it's not an issue. It's about people, and it's also the big teachings about this that are coming from the side that's looking to, like, we would say, from a position of hate. Are Christians, and so this does become a church issue to talk about. We'll also talk some about specifically about trans issues, because that's just right in the headlines all the time right now, in a group that traditionally has been the most discriminated against, the highest rates of suicide, you know, just,
Mm-hmm.
and especially right now is really feeling kind of under attack in our
Because they
community
are
here,
literally
because they
under
are literally
attack.
under attack, right? So we're going to talk about that too, because all of these things, there are biblical truths and answers and conversation to be had, and ways to read the Genesis passages and the Leviticus passages and the First Corinthians and Romans. We're going to talk about all of them.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to go through every one of the quote clobber passages, and then we'll spend a little more time in Genesis too, specifically about gender. So if any of those are questions you have, you should come join us. We'll be a part of it. I think we're also going to record at least the audio of it. We're still figuring that out. So if you can't make it, we'll try and share those resources too. And there's some great books. If you're a reader, there's like 2 really good books that we're working with right now. But
Perfect.
that's what we're doing. So that's what's happening here at Maitland Presbyterian Church right now, at least from our coming out of our offices with the things we're reading and praying on.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other just great things happening here in this church. So if you don't have a church home and somehow you stumbled onto this podcast, like, come hang out with us on
Yeah.
any Sunday at 9:30 and 11. We'd love to have you.
We would.
All right, church
Hey,
chat.
good church chat.
Good church chat. All right,
All
we'll
right.
see you guys later.
Bye.